Charles Proteus Steinmetz. Maybe you've heard the name before. He was called the Wizard of Schenectady, a mathematical and electrical genius who was one of the most recognizable figures of his time. Steinmetz was only 4 feet tall, with a hump on his back, and his crooked body gave the impression that his head, hands, and feet were too big. Yet he was a giant among thinkers and counted Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, and Albert Einstein as friends. There are many anecdotal tales about Steinmetz. The following story about this man, who is described as a German gnome, appeared in Life magazine in 1965. The story of Henry Ford's encounter with Steinmetz at Ford's River Rouge factory in Dearborn, Michigan. Ford and his electrical engineers could not solve a problem that they were having with a gigantic generator. So they called Steinmetz into the plant. When Steinmetz arrived, he asked for a notebook, a pencil, and a cot. For 2 days, Steinmetz listened to the generator, scribbled some notes, and then on the second night, he asked for a ladder. He climbed up the generator, made a few chalk marks on its side, and then he told Ford's engineers to remove a plate at the mark and replace a few small parts. They did, and the generator performed to perfection. Henry Ford was thrilled until he got the bill for $10,000, which is the equivalent of about $200,000 today. Grateful for Steinmetz's help, he was upset by the bill, so Ford asked for an itemized bill. Steinmetz responded personally to Ford's request with the following: making chalk mark on generator, $1. Knowing where to make chalk mark, $9,999. And then Ford paid the bill. I love that story. Next week, we're going to pick up a new sermon series. As Lee said, we're going to be talking about, we're calling it Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. As we look back over the course of 2,000 years of church history, there are a lot of things that stand out as beautiful illustrations from people who have preceded us. Beautiful illustrations of how the Christian life is lived out, and in a few cases, how it ought not to be lived out. When we come to Constantine and things like that, people like that. However, nonetheless, we're going to learn from church history, not in an academic sense, but we're going to study biblical texts, and then we're going to see how these biblical texts are embodied by real people, people who have walked this earth in various contexts, living out their Christian faith. Of course, last week we finished up our sermon series on Nehemiah, which leaves this week. And I thought to myself, in fact, I've been wrestling with topics for the last few weeks for today. And I eventually settled, the middle of last week, on a topic that feels immensely personal to me. Lee and I have felt some unique complexity to the last few weeks. And as much as we've prayed and sought peace, I've found myself wondering in very specific circumstances what to do. Do you ever find yourself in a very specific circumstance wondering what to do? Again, I started prep on a bunch of different sermons, and maybe they'll make their appearance at some point, but I didn't feel right moving forward with any of them, knowing that I was feeling this kind of inner churn within myself. Waking up early in the morning, processing. Some people stay up late processing. I wake up early processing. And then midweek, this past week, feeling sort of the anxiety over this, I was sitting in a band concert at the middle school up by our house, watching my two daughters play their trombones, plural, in a school performance. Pretty cool to see both girls playing at the same time. And feeling that bit of anxiety, the words shot through my mind, and they brought peace. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, I surely do not know the complexities of your life and circumstances, though with some of you who have invited us in, I know some of those things. Relational issues, decisions to be made, conflicts either in the background or in the foreground, job stress, job loss, sickness, weariness. Our lives are filled with many complex situations. And yet I'm confident that this one sentence represents a powerful truth that can bring you peace. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so that's where I'd like to land this morning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's just the first half of one verse out of Proverbs chapter 9. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10. Again, it says, let's read it together. You can see it on the screen there. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Let's do it one more time. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So my goal is to walk through this verse in three parts and to unpack the gravity and the breadth of its significance for us. My hope is that you will find new strength for whatever circumstances you might be experiencing, that you might find peace within the truth of this verse for the complexities that you face in your life. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So we start with the fear of the Lord, the fear of the Lord. If you take a common dictionary and open it up to try to find a definition for fear, you're going to find that generally fear is defined as a negative thing. It's an unpleasant emotion caused by something dangerous, a distressing feeling because of a threat that is either real or imagined. Right now, can you think of something in life that causes you fear? I am afraid of snakes, truth be told. Matt is not here this morning. Matt Lovell has a snake at his house, and I am afraid of that. What are you afraid of? Well, that's the common definition of fear. The fear in the fear of the Lord is different. It is what I'm going to call affectionate reverence. The fear of the Lord begins with reverence. It springs from a profound acknowledgement of God's worthiness. I catch a glimpse of his greatness. I fathom for a moment the depths of his love, and I contemplate his eternality, and that affects me. This knowledge of God affects my response to God. The knowledge of who God is affects how I respond to him. It's affectionate reverence. If you've ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, anybody here ever read C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia? Or maybe you've watched the movies that came out years ago. And one of the most profound scenes in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Pevensey children are learning about the great lion. They haven't yet met the great lion, Aslan. But they're learning about the lion from the beavers. Remember Mr. and Mrs. Beaver? I love reading these books aloud because I love giving voices to Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. Susan expresses concern over meeting Aslan. Is he safe? She asks. Her little sister concurs, certainly he is not safe. Why? Because he's a lion. And Mr. Beaver responds, safe? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. Many people are disturbed by the language of the fear of the Lord. People want to whitewash that and say, it's not appropriate to fear such a loving God. Well, maybe our problem is with our definition of fear. People are frustrated by that idea, as if their God ought to behave predictably, as if their God ought to be like a domesticated animal. And we had a fox running through our neighborhood, and I would be afraid to meet the fox outside with my two little chihuahuas because that's a wild animal. But I'm not afraid of my little Carlos. He's domesticated. And well, for the most part, we want our God to be just like that. We want him to be predictable. We want him to be just like a domesticated animal. But here's the thing. God is not predictable, and he cannot be controlled. But he can always be trusted. Affectionate reverence. Affectionate reverence. We cannot control him, but we can trust him. That feeling, can you feel that? That feeling, that gut level, lights come on, awareness of who he is, that is the fear of the Lord. To be aware of who he is and to feel that in the depths of your gut and to know just a fraction of who it is that you stand before. Can you recall a time in your life when you felt that fear of the Lord? When the enormity of his being overshadowed you with the gravity of its implications for your life? I'll never forget a moment, perhaps it was the first time in my life when I experienced the fear of the Lord. I was a teenager. I was about 16 years old, It was a moment when I was first consciously aware of his love, his extreme love, and also of his justice, that he is a God that does not disregard sin. And I found myself contemplating the cross, and I could literally do nothing other than simply weep on account of the very personal implications of his love and justice. That is affectionate reverence. That is the fear of the Lord. I've experienced this over and over in my journey as a Christian, that affectionate reverence has typically come as a profoundly simple awareness of an eternal truth about God that has immediate implications for me. That's why it's so important for us to study the scriptures, and study the scriptures not as a history book, but as the revelation of our God. Because when we become aware of who he is, and it touches on something very personal for us, and we have that gut level, lights come on, emotional reaction, that is the fear of the Lord. And my heart in those moments is shot through and defeated, not with anxiety, but defeated with peace that can only come from him. The fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord, the verse says, is the beginning. Now, the word beginning could mean one of three things. The word beginning could mean, it could reference time. It could refer to the first in a series of events. In the beginning of this morning's service, we sang a song. It could refer to a time. I knew from the beginning that this would be hard. Or it can refer to a quality, referring to the first in importance among a group of other important things. That amazing decision that he made, it was the beginning of his career. He might have had a job for 10, 15 years, but that amazing decision that he had to buy that company was the beginning of his career. Or it could mean understanding, referring to the first understanding from which comes all other understanding. And that's the meaning in the text here. What the alphabet is to reading, notes to reading music, and numerals to mathematics, the fear of the Lord is to attaining wisdom. The very first task in learning is to what? The very first task in learning to read is learning your alphabet. Each letter and the sound it makes. What sound does the letter K make? Some of you who homeschool, you know you do this, right? With your kids. And then there's the ones that are really hard, like C. What sound does C make? Or K, right? Or, anyways, we'll just move on from that. We get it. But here's the thing, you never outgrow your need for the alphabet. Even today, if you're looking up on that screen, you're utilizing the alphabet to make sense of what you're reading. You never outgrow the alphabet. Even when you reach the zenith of your studies, the highest point of your career, whatever your highest paying job might be, you are still so utterly dependent on the alphabet. You're never going to outgrow it. Again, the fear of the Lord is to wisdom what the alphabet is to reading. Without the alphabet, there is no reading. Without the fear of the Lord, the author would say, there is no real wisdom. Now, to be clear, thinking about the fear of God in this way, I think requires a bit of a paradigm shift. It is so much more natural and instinctual to people to compartmentalize God, to relegate God to Sunday mornings. The fear of the Lord. Yeah, I experienced that for maybe 60 or 65 minutes if the preacher goes long on a Sunday morning, or relegate him to a mealtime blessing, or to prayers in crisis. But what we're talking about here, just like those letters of the alphabet infiltrate all of your communication, in the same way, the fear of the Lord ought to saturate our lives. The God-saturated mind, inspired by affectionate reverence, never moves on from him. We never move on from him. David Gill wrote a book in 1988 called The Opening of the Christian Mind, and he points to 7 qualities of the life in which the fear of the Lord is the beginning. And I think that the list is helpful. The list is helpful for checking how far the fear of the Lord has permeated your life. A person genuinely alive with affectionate reverence for God, number one, contemplates God at the very center of the mind. The person who is alive with affectionate reverence thinks about God. That's the theological piece. And then there's the historical piece. The person who is genuinely alive with affectionate reverence sees all of history, not just their life, but all of life, of all of time, sees history as the theater for God's activity. And then there's the humanist perspective. A person who's genuinely alive with affectionate reverence for God values the dignity and worth of all people created in the image of God, even people that they may not accept or like. Because all people, according to the book of Genesis, are created in the image of God. A person who is genuinely alive with affectionate reverence for God is sensitive, we're talking about morality, is sensitive to matters of good and evil, not just for them, not just localized, not just for their particular life, but concerned for spiritual transformation out there as well, such that it affects their public discourse. The person who is genuinely alive with affectionate reverence for God seeks to live in and live out God's truth in every realm. That's truthful. And the sixth is aesthetic. A person who is genuinely alive with affectionate reverence for God rejoices in the beauty that God has stamped upon the world that he has made. Do you know that you can look at a beautiful day like this and say, praise God? Because he's the one who both made it and sustains it. The mind that has been infected and permeated by the fear of God sees God in the beauty that he has created. And then finally, joyful. The person who is genuinely alive with affectionate reverence for God radiates God-infused passion with deep gladness. And that doesn't mean just coming to church and singing with a loud voice, though, coming to church and singing with at least a voice is probably appropriate. But it means fulfilling your calling with joy, knowing that God has thrust you into that position, thrust you into that place, that school, wherever you find yourself, living out the Christian life with joy, knowing that he has sovereignly placed you there. Again, the point is that you never move on from the fear of the Lord. It's the beginning. It's the starting point. It's where we begin the Christian life. You never move on from it. On the contrary, the fear of the Lord captures you, and it becomes the confession by which you make sense of every other thing that's in your life. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom. The Hebrew word for wisdom is hokmah. It's used to describe people who are skilled, able, capable. If we were to go around the room, wisdom, especially those of you who have lived a few years, you might have your own definition of wisdom. The definition or the idea here in hokmah is one of practical aptitude, the capacity for skilled living. Obviously, it's talked about a lot in the book of Proverbs. In the book of Proverbs, the wise are juxtaposed against three other types of people. The wise are juxtaposed against the simple, the fool, and the scoffer. Let's take a moment to talk about these three. The simple. Anybody feel offended to be called simple? I mean, I feel it. I feel it. To be simple is to be naive. To be seducible, is that a word? Gullible. The simple, his biggest problem is that he lacks judgment. His biggest vulnerability is that he doesn't know it. He lacks judgment, and he doesn't know that he lacks judgment. In fact, if he knew that he lacked judgment, he probably would be wise. if you're just getting your start in life, don't be offended by this, but you're simple. And it's not condescending. That's not intended to come at you as an insult. But you have no other option because you do not yet have the experience and the learning that comes, the judgment that comes from living life. You cannot have that wisdom because you have not yet developed that understanding. In my experience, the people who think they're the smartest are usually the people that are the youngest. And I would say that was true in my life as well. The younger I was, the smarter I thought I was. Life has a way of flushing that toilet, I'm telling you. In fact, anytime we come into anything new, I'm speaking towards all of us of all ages now, anytime we come into anything new, whether that is marriage, parenthood, a new career, a move, a new environment, moving across country or moving into another culture, our biggest vulnerability is to think that we understand when we don't. That means that all of us, at many different seasons of life, can be called simple. We lack judgment. We lack discernment. And our biggest vulnerability is to think that we understand it when we don't. Now, again, let the stinger come out of that bee for a moment. Simplicity is not an insult, it's a reality. All of us, if we have not had the experience, if we have not learned the importance of judgment, the ability to make the right decision, all of us are simple in those circumstances. Now, the solution to simplicity is not to deny it. The solution is to trust God. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. The solution for the simple or the naive is to trust God and to lean on the more seasoned counsel of those who have experience. Now, that's the simple. If the simple doesn't know, the fool, who's our second person, doesn't care. The simple doesn't know, the fool doesn't care. Nothing wrong with being simple because you're going to grow out of that. Now, the fool, that's a different story. The fool laps up opinions without reflection. The fool dishes out advice without constraint. The fool is complacent and careless. The book of Proverbs compares the fool to what? A dog that returns to its vomit. Yes, we just said that word in church. Too lazy to care, he is satisfied with throw up. He's disinterested in anything that might be better. His problem is that he doesn't care. His vulnerability is the inevitable hurt that he's going to cause himself and the people around him. Now, the solution to the fool is to learn the hard way. That's why Proverbs says, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the back of fools. That doesn't mean that we ought to go out and get rods and whips and start beating fools. But the point is that sometimes the fool just has to learn the hard way. So there's the simple, there's the fool, and then finally there's the scoffer. The scoffer. The scoffer is different. More than not caring, the scoffer ridicules those who do care. The scoffer assumes that his position is better than wisdom and that his understanding justifies what he thinks is best, even though it contradicts the fear of the Lord. His problem is not aptitude. His problem is attitude. He knows the right thing to do. He has heard wisdom, but he causes trouble and he mocks your morality. The solution for the mocker, according to the book of Proverbs, is to drive him out. Proverbs 22:10, drive out a scoffer, and quarrels will cease. Now, I'm trying to explain our verse this morning by contrasting and comparing the wise with these three other types that are presented in the book of Proverbs. Reality is all of us have been all three of these at one point in life. Perhaps in one immediate situation, we've been all three, the simple, the fool, or the mocker or scoffer. The hope for each one of these is wisdom, practical aptitude, a capacity for skilled living. There's an old 19th century proverb that describes some of these differences. It's a clever one. I'll read it. He that knows not and knows not that he knows not, he is a fool. Shun him. He that knows not and knows that he knows not, he is simple. Teach him. He that knows and knows not that he knows, he is asleep. Wake him. He that knows and knows that he knows, he is a wise man. Follow him. Now, just for a moment, think of a situation. Think of a situation, it could be one, it could be two, it could be three, that make your life complex right now. And don't just look at me like, yeah, I'm not going to think of it. Think about it. Call something to mind, a situation in your mind that makes life complex. You have something in mind? Let me ask you a few questions. Is it possible that you don't know what you don't know? In other words, are there things that you may not understand about that situation? In what ways are you inclined to settle for old and ineffective solutions? That's what the fool does. To what extent do you assume you know better and don't need to listen to the wisdom of God or the wisdom of people around you? That would be the attitude of the mocker. You see, all three of these types are within all of us at some point. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. My intent with this morning's sermon is not to address any particular situation that I see in you, but to be very personal, to address a deficiency that I see in myself. I need wisdom. Am I alone in that? I need wisdom. Maybe you do too. I need wisdom in relationships. I need wisdom at work. I need wisdom in ministry. I need wisdom in my faith. And I can see the complex details of my life. I can see the complex spaces and situations in which black and white simply, tell me what to do, God. Just tell me which way to go, right or left, just simply doesn't work anymore. Life just isn't like that, cut and dry, black and white. But if I'm not careful, I can be too quickly overcome with stress and anxiety over what feels like is out of control. So what is the solution? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is affectionate reverence. It's that lights come on awareness of who he is and what that means for you. The fear of the Lord is the beginning, not the first in time, but the first in understanding. The fear of the Lord is to making sense of your life, what the alphabet is to learning how to read and make sense of words. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, a practical aptitude for skilled living. And I can tell you, this brings peace. Some of you have met my father for as far back as I can remember. A regular feature of my father when he would pray around the dinner table or just in life in general, one of the most regular features of his prayers has been a request for wisdom and discernment. Just like that, he would say, and God, give us wisdom and discernment. I mean, if we prayed together, I don't know how many days of my youth for 18 years, I remember him praying over and over again, God, give us wisdom and discernment. As a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, I totally did not appreciate the request. But from where I stand today, I can testify, seeing the complexity of life from a different angle, and I can appreciate the dire need for wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I'm going to pray. I saw that. I'm going to pray, and then in a moment we're gonna sing a little bit before we take communion. We're gonna sing as we take it. While we come up. Okay. I'm going to pray, and then Aurora and the worship team is going to come and lead us in communion. And as we do that, I would encourage you to take the time. You can stay seated for a few moments and just contemplate the significance. Allow that fear of the Lord to set in over what the cross symbolizes, over what that means. If you'd like to have a few moments just to pray and take that in, and to feel the heaviness the gravity, we don't know. Uh, for the Heavenly Father, I thank you for the opportunity that we have today to know you, and that in the knowledge of you, it's not just a fact book, it's not just an encyclopedia, but God, it, it changes us. And I pray, Father, that you would so permeate our lives in all those categories and what we see outside and what we think in our heads and how we engage with right and wrong. Lord, may all those areas of our lives be infiltrated and impacted by what we know to be true about you. And may that be our space for learning and growing. Thank you for the opportunity to celebrate communion. I pray, Lord, that you would be honored as we come together as a body to remember the most significant sacrifice, that one thing that sets us apart, that you, God, entered into our world, took on human flesh, died on the cross, forgiving us for our sin, reconciling us to yourself so that we might be with you for eternity. We thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.